Hello, hello, and welcome to Tea with Halo. And today I have David Rankine. This is the podcast of the Enchanted Academy. I am Halo Quinn, your host, and I am a pagan author, a storyteller, a witch, and a teacher of magic. And because I am so fascinated by magic and because I enjoy teaching it, I love to hear about other people's practices and the things that they teach and the different traditions, different paths that feed into this glorious melting pot and magical web that is, well, magic. So I like to invite on a different guest to come and talk to us about their practice, their path, and the things that they are passionate about. These are unscripted, unedited conversations. So expect some rabbit holes and let's have a chat about how together we can dive into a more enchanted world. So today, I really want to say thank you so much to David Rankine for coming and joining me. I would love for you to introduce yourself to our listeners.
And thank you, Quayla. Halo. Editing issue there at the beginning.
That's all right, pre-disastered. It means that everything is uphill from now.
um, yes, I guess I'm best known for my work in the grimoire tradition, which has been kind of always there for me since, well, I suppose my first conjuration back in 1981. In more recent years, I published the Grimoire Encyclopaedia first two volumes, which are kind of like a panoramic oversight of the grimoires because there's a lot of them. And my most recent book was Claves Intelligentarium, which is like a practical conjuration manual for working with the planetary intelligences. Because I felt there wasn't really anything that people could go to. They just had it all in one place. And if you've never done it, you can have this all the source material there. We've explained what you do, how you do it, why you do it, and then hopefully go away and do it. And I've just finished writing the follow-up to that, Clavis Spiritum, because it's going to be a trilogy. And hopefully that should be out later in the year with Hadean, who are my publishers and who I also work for as the editor-in-chief. And yeah, so I'm known really, especially for that, also for Kabbalah, and in the past I was involved a long time in Wicca, Telema, kind of like multitude of interests as one tends to have. I'm an author, editor, practitioner. I usually describe myself as a sorcerer,
Mm.
which I've been doing for a long time before it became trendy. All my old accounts on Yahoo and things had like names like Star Sorcerer,
Oh,
but
I
it got
love it.
hacked. I lost Star Sorcerer, but some of my accounts, like my old Skype account and stuff, still have and my what was Twitter now X. I think they're all Star Sorcerer, even if I don't really use them.
But that feeds nicely. So, I mean, that's names, isn't it? The magic of names, and that ties in with your planetary intelligence's focus in that. I was intelligent, intelligent. No, I'm not going to try and say it. Your wonderful introductory manual to conjuring planetary intelligences.
Yeah, it was inspired by, as is often the case, something somebody else said. Like I was preparing a workshop for an Italian group, the Sulphur Society, because they'd approached myself and Stephen Skinner. They were going to be the course they were doing. They were going to do conjuration at the end, and Steve and I both agreed intelligences would be the best introduction for people who hadn't done any conjuration before. And end up that Stephen did the theoretical and I did the practical. And I was putting the practical material together. And whilst I was doing it, I read this lovely review that Jason Miller wrote on the Grimoire Encyclopaedia. And he made a comment about the chapter I'd written in there on practice and saying, oh, this is a voice we don't hear often enough, Rankin the Conjurer. And I thought, yeah, I should. I've always told people for years and years, intelligence is, I think, one of the best gateways in to conjuration because by nature, they tend to be very like friendly and easy to deal with. So you don't have the trickiness that you can get with the infernal spirits because they are celestials. And I published the booklet with Hadean back in, I think, 2018 of conjurations, which are in one of the Sloane manuscripts. So, but I've been saying go away and do it. That just gives the conjuration. It doesn't give everything else. So, I suddenly thought, God, I'm kind of giving hollow advice. I do think they're the best way in, but if I'm telling people that, I should provide them with everything else that goes around it. And then I'm being true to my advice because here you go. I think it's the best entrance, and here's a book that tells you all you need to do. And so I wrote Claves Intelligentarium, which has had an amazing response from people. I've had so much positive feedback. Get multiple emails a week from people thanking me and saying what great results they've had, which is delightful because that's why it was written. And as soon as I'd finished writing it, I started getting prompts and pushes from spirits I work with. Your job's not done here. And so, along has come Clavis Spiritum, which expands a lot on the material. The focus there is on the Olympic spirits and the demon bishops. But some of the material is revised from the first book because although it works great, I'm a great believer that we always want to make what we do the best it can be. And so we should never be afraid to revise and tweak stuff if we find ways to make it better. So there's some bits in it which I've sort of expanded on what was in the first book, saying that works great, but I think this is even better than that. And plus some exciting, other bits that realizations I had or insights I was given from, like I say, some of the spirits that I work with through dreams or just direct messages into my head of, oi, you need to look at this. And
so David, what actually is conjuration? Like what do people, why would you do conjuration, and what actually is it?
Okay, so conjuration is calling a spirit into usually a crystal or a mirror. There's this idea of there's these myths around it, like, oh, you call them into the smoke and they manifest in the smoke, and that, which is a nice idea, but a bit nonsensical. The smoke aspect is relevant from another point of view, which is fragrance is a really important thing with conjuration because spirits are really sensitive to smell. They like nice smells. We see that referenced. You see it in ancient Egypt. You see it mentioned in Babylonian, Sumerian texts, etc. That goes way back. So it's calling a spirit that you want to engage with, using usually a crystal ball or a magic mirror as your doorway to engage with that spirit, because that spirit is being called on the lower astral to the corresponding part of the lower astral to where you are on the physical, because the lower astral superimposed over the physical, and then engaging with the spirit, usually to get knowledge out of it or to ask it to do a task for you. And obviously there are different types of spirits. I've already mentioned the Olympic spirits, which are an interesting group of planetary spirits. You have things like the planetary intelligences, you have angels, archangels, or different types of demons. There's lots of different spirits. They tend to have different qualities or that you might want to work with for different results. So in a nutshell, it's a process of purifying and preparing yourself so that you're in the best spiritual and mental, emotional shape to do the conjuration, making yourself as pure as you can be, because spirits like purity as well. Consecrating the various paraphernalia that you need, which also the consecration has the dual effect of acting as kind of like a beacon, like shining on the lower astral and helping be a concerted mass of consecrated equipment and consecrated purified practitioners, which acts as kind of like a beacon. And then usually like prayers to the divine, and then the actual conjuration of the spirit to come and engage.
And so through that process, you've been like you lay it out so beautifully in Claves Intelligentarium, and reading that when I read that copy earlier this year and I put a review of it up, it suddenly helped to solidify all of the different, I read in various different grimoires these different techniques, and like it put them into order, if you like. It suddenly made all of these puzzle pieces click into place and open up that process. So you lay it out so beautifully in that. And I saw in it mirrored various processes that I found in other places, in other traditions, in other paths, in the pagan circles where we're doing, well, we're calling on deity, right? Invoking deity. And you, especially if you're doing something like aspecting, which is like light possession work, you get yourself into the right frame of mind, into so that you are a clear channel for it. You call on the deity, you have the like the suitable fragrances and colors and things that they like, and then you call them through, and you generally in that instance, like, you'd speak with their voice, but you might like do it through an object and have them speak to you through a mirror or whatever, again for finding knowledge or for making a petition or request. And it's fascinating to me how you've got these processes that we as humans are reaching out to those spirits and going, let's be in partnership, let's talk to each other, let's share things.
Yeah, I mean, you made several points in there. I mean, the first is that most of the grimoires were people's personal notebooks and things they were writing. So they're not manuals, they're not complete how you do it text. There are a few that are, I mean, from the early days, like the Swarm of Grimoires, so it's like how you do it, but which aren't actually very practical in this day and age, where you've got to do stuff for 9 days, where you're having multiple magic circles that nobody else can go and disturb, and you have to, dig a sort of pit for one and have another one on a raised mound, and incredible amount of stuff that needs to be done, which would be, unless somebody is rich and has private land, is really impractical in this day and age. And that's one of my motivations for the first Claves, was something that is practical for now, that's true to the essence of the tradition, uses all the techniques that work, but brings it into our period, and introducing aspects that weren't there, so they weren't relevant, but are now. For example, the electronic fast, which I hadn't seen anyone talk about in the past. I'm not saying they haven't, I just hadn't seen it. So I wrote about that in the Grimoire Encyclopaedia, that when you're doing that purification beforehand, that includes, staying off social media, staying off gaming, minimizing, not watching your Netflix or whatever, and having minimal visual stimulation like that, only dealing with, essential emails or have you, to help your mental focus remain on the purpose. Because, conjuration is quite I don't say complex, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of layers of simplicity that build on each other. And one of the key things really is the preparation of yourself for it. You've got a week, or in some 9 days, but I work on a week principle, the week-long preparation. And every day you're having purificatory pathway, what you're saying, some of the Psalms, and you're getting yourself ready, you're fragrancing yourself, you're doing all the stuff so that on the final day when you do the conjuration, or night, depending what the spirit is and the appropriate hour, you have really focused with social and physical and electronic fasting as much as is possible. But again, it's being practical. Physical fasting is not necessary to just like be on just water for 3 days, or some people 7 days, because if you've ever done a 7-day water fast, which I did when I was younger, by the end of it you're completely spaced out and not in a fit state to be doing that sort of magic. The way it's like you cut out the classics, like you cut out your meat and fish and stuff, alcohol, tobacco, etc. in the fasting period, but that you then, the last day, you just have apple juice, so your blood sugar doesn't drop. Or if you can't drink apple juice, and another appropriate juice. You have to be aware, if there could be health issues, which is factors I take, emphasize a bit in my books. Like, I don't use incense because it's the fragrance that's important with the spirit, not the smoke. So I prefer to use oil burners, because you just get the pure fragrance. You can use blessed water with the essential oil in, and it's a nice fragrance the whole time. Whereas any incense, and this is pure resin, by the end it smells like a bonfire. you know. And an oil burner will keep that fragrance going for hours if you need it. Where you don't have to keep putting more on like with incense. So, and if you're in a closed space, and a lot of people do conjuration indoors, the smoke, if someone's got asthma or any sort of chest issues, by having an oil burner, that issue is taken away. So to me, that it's including practical things that are relevant for now, and being more sensitive to the environment. I mean, I prefer to do conjuration outdoors, but it's not always practical because you've got to take the kit there and have an isolated spot.
So that, I mean, for me, I use an oil burner with I use like quite a short oil burner that's got, I put silver foil in the top, and if I want to use any incense, I just put resin in that. And I'll add drops of essential oil if I want to, and that warms the resin and releases the scent. Because if I burn any more than half a joss stick, I set the fire alarm off, and then my entire building has to evacuate, leaving aside the asthmatic issue.
Yeah, I mean that is the thing with the smoke. You do have that issue with smoke alarms in the modern. What house doesn't have a smoke alarm these days?
Yeah, and if you take the battery out, you've got to remember to put it back in, so that's then a fire risk, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, and I love that you think about those things and that you are explicit about them, like the consecrating your contact lenses and like your underwear and all of those little details. It just sort of adds that, oh yeah, so if I start thinking about those details that aren't mentioned, where else? And that helps people, I think, to open up the conversation of like, oh, what else do I need to consider nowadays?
I mean, that's something I've tried to do with the books. I mean, I had feedback from somebody yesterday on Clavis Spiritum. They're saying, I really like the way that you write because you have this like really sort of clear, easy voice in it. And I'm saying, well, the way I write practical stuff is it's kind of like I suppose my teaching voice. That's why it's littered with footnotes because they're like those digressions, when you're teaching stuff and you're like, oh, and I need to mention this or I need to clarify this, so yeah. The people who know me so they can like when they're reading it, they can hear me saying it because
Yeah.
they recognise like that style of mine, which I don't like to obfuscate or make stuff complex. I'm a great believer in keep things as simple as possible and as clear as possible, and that's what I try. And I think that's quite off-putting for some people with the grimoires. They think it's all really complex and over the top, and it doesn't have to be. It's like with equipment, just have the minimum, the actual stuff you need. Half the time, the stuff that's in the grimoires isn't actually necessary at the time. So it's just have your bare basics of what is necessary. It's that is stripped down to all the essentials. There's still a lot to do, but there isn't any unnecessary stuff. And I also talk about things you can do, like this is more in the new book. The idea of magical momentum, building up your momentum, which is what you're doing in that week of purification. But in the new book, I'm talking about how usually you want a specific timing for conjuration, and that might be months away. So rather than just waiting for that final week and doing your purification, there are things you can do right from the time you made the decision that you can do on a daily basis, like wearing the fragrance that you're going to burn. So you're building a connection with you and that fragrance. And with the fragrance things, like you fragrance yourself with that. So you have that fragrance, you burn it for the spirit. So it's an offering to the spirit. The words of conjuration are carried on the fragrance, and the spirit's brought back to you. So it's what I call a communion of fragrance, of you and the spirit. But other simple things like that, if it's a planetary one, then you can wear something every day that's the appropriate planetary color. Just building up momentum by using sympathetic magic in the run-up period. So by the time you get there, it's like if you're driving a car, this is for people who don't drive automatics, instead of, at the beginning of the week of purification, turning on the ignition and going into first gear, it's like by the time you get to that week, you're already in second or third gear because you built up a load of momentum in those preceding weeks or months through simple practices as well. And that's obviously something that's not in the grimoires, but it's something that I've thought about and applied, and it really helps. And people say, oh, I did conjuration, it didn't really work, and that can be disheartening for people. But it doesn't always work. The spirits don't always come. We don't know; they might be busy. We don't know what the spirits are up to in their lives. The secret life of spirits. Who knows what they
That's a
do.
sitcom.
It could be, couldn't it? The rest of the time that they're not with us, it could be that they have very busy lives, experiences, and that's why certain hours, like planetary times and hours, are better to call them because it's the time they're free and they're
It's their
willing to
office
come.
hours.
Yeah, it's out of office. It's their office hours, and the rest of the time it's out of office. The phones are off. Don't call, please. Um, so yeah, it's really. I'm trying to, from my experience of what makes successful conjuration with these books, give people all the tools I can to have a successful conjuration the first time they try it, or if they've done it before, the next time. And also to stress, this is my template, based on 45 years of work. It's not an absolute. I'm not saying I'm perfect or you have to do it my way, but if you're new to it, you might find it good.
Mm.
A lot of people have emailed me and said, oh, I took this bit and this bit and this bit and added it into my practice and it's flowing much better now. And that's great. They didn't take the whole thing. They took the bits that they wanted. And that's, how magic works so much of the time. It's like you see some other bit that's really good and you synthesize it in, you
Mm.
sort of create that new improved form. And so, people, it's great either way. If they do the whole thing, they take the bits. If it helps people, that's what it's there for. And I'm very happy. And like I say, it's wonderful to be getting so much feedback consistently from people that's all like, yeah, thank you, thank you.
It's really lovely. I can hear how much it means to you that people are actually using this book and getting things out of it. And it just is a testament to how much you care about this, that you care about helping other people to achieve this conversation with these spirits.
Yeah, because once you've had, as you yourself know, that first time that you actually have that spirit engagement and that realization that spirits are distinct, separate entities that are not in our heads, that have their own existence, the world around us is never the same.
Mm-hmm.
It is a life-changing moment, and it's a great moment. And I think so. Yeah, the more people have that moment, and also then as you work with spirits, you become more sensitive to, it's like spirit ecology, and I think it makes you more sensitive to your environment, have more of a care about the world around you, about nature, about people. If you are doing, having any magical system and actually working it, not paying lip service, but working it, it will. I think it will evolve you as a person, and as a result, those characteristics, even if they weren't there at the beginning, even if you went in with like dodgy reasons, like, oh, I want to be like black magician who controls people, you do the work and suddenly you think, hang on, I have to call on God and do all this stuff, and I have to do all this purification, and the changes kind of fit in, and then the people start actually being compassionate and wanting to change the world for better is what it's about, and engaging with spirits really, I mean, engenders that in people, that sort of wider appreciation of the interconnectedness and coexistence of us all.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this reminds me of that piece that, again, like I come from a primarily like pagan background and those sorts of things, and I know you've had you've been in those spaces as well, so you'll know what I'm talking about, and you even reference this in the first Clavis book, and it's that piece about so many people within those backgrounds are both put off from the grimoire material because of the Christian language, but also because of the because of that sort of hierarchical language. the sense that we're somehow like bossing those spirits around. And what I'm hearing from you is, and what my experience has been actually working with that material and paying attention to the nuances, is that it's not about bossing them around, it's about entering into a web.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you work with the spirits, it's very much a symbiotic relationship. You know, we get something from it. We have to assume they do. I mean, if only the offerings of the fragrances, which seems to be beneficial to them. You know, I've speculated about this, wondering whether it somehow contributes to their own evolution to actually do things for people, to do things for humans. And that's why they're willing to do it. Because if they didn't want to do it, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
There is actually, is actually mentioned in, I think it's the Arbiter, where it says, like a good magician, the spirits will come for an average magician, they might send some along, and an evil magician, they'll send demons. It's like if the spirits don't want to help you because your motivations aren't pure, they won't, unless you go for some of the very dodgy ones, in which case you're playing with fire because they're going to be looking for any way to get you as well. The spirits, I'm not saying they're all sweetness and light, they're like humans. There's good ones, there's some bad ones. There's some bad people in the world today. And we can't assume that all the spirits. I mean, I'm not to say this. When I say they're like humans, I mean there's a certain quality. They aren't like humans. We shouldn't anthropomorphize them. But at the same time, we can't assume that all spirits fall into one category, because they clearly don't. And there are different types who you would approach for different reasons. There are what I call sort of, like the astral larvae. There's like sort of ones that are more like parasitic, that are entirely unhealthy for humans. The third book, which won't be out for a couple of years, because I've got 2 more books I want to get finished before I write the end of the Clavis trilogy. But one of the things I've written some stuff about already, because you know what it's like as an author. You have an idea, and even if that book's not going to come out well, you've still got to get it down while it's fresh and get the inspiration grounded. But I do I'm talking that about obsessive spirits, like these larvae, and how they can affect people, particularly people with addiction issues, and how they feed off that. So, that's something I'll be going into in more depth in that book, because that's something that's not really talked about very much, and does need to be, I think, out there more in the magical world. Understandings of how easy it can be for those to latch on to people, and how important spiritual hygiene is. Spiritual hygiene is another thing in book 3 that I'll be going into a lot of, just how living your life, because at the end of the day, something like conjuration is something that's just done occasionally. A lot of the time with grimoire stuff, you'll be using charms, pentacles, and things. I mentioned in the book, I think you only need to do a conjuration, say 10% of the time. The rest of the time, you can get perfectly good results through using other techniques, simpler techniques that require a lot less preparation, etc. And also to appreciate that if it's protective magic, for someone to not be sick, or to not have your house broken into, or protection while traveling, or what it might be, if nothing happens, the magic is working.
Mm-hmm.
And that can seem like quite surreal for people, that, well, nothing happened, the magic worked, but nothing happened. But the magic was made for nothing to happen. That's the whole point of protective magic, So, yeah, I'm trying to bring more issues, I suppose, hopefully out for people to talk about more in public, and I hope people will sort of engage more and be more, considering. That's why I've written a chapter in the new book on conjuration from a practical point of view for people with sensory or physical impairment.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's something that is not talked about at all, as far as I know, in the grimoire world. But, I had an email some months back from a gentleman saying, I'm in a wheelchair, I have mild cerebral palsy, I'm going to be doing my first conjuration, I've got a couple of people who are assisting me. Do you have any advice? I ended up writing him a long email saying, well, you could do this and this, and maybe you split the work with the other person on this bit. And
Hmm.
after I'd written in the email, I thought, I really need to put a chapter on this in the book. This is something we need to have more out there,
Definitely.
discussed more. I actually
It's
felt a bit sort of embarrassed with myself, because I worked for years to care for people with learning disabilities, people in wheelchairs and things every day. But it's because it's not your own experience, you don't think about it. So unconscious bias is a powerful force for us to
very
deal
much so.
with. And so yeah, I've written that. I contacted Craig Slee and asked him if he'd read through it for me, because he talks and writes about magic with physical disability, and he was happy with what I'd written, because obviously, I mean, I don't have a disability, so I didn't want to be insensitive. And I say in that chapter, I'm writing from this perspective. These are suggestions, and this is trying to open up more of a dialogue. And because it's true, not just for grimoires, but magic generally, that we need to be more, considerate
Yeah.
of our
This,
other humans.
yeah, and this is something that so I as soon as it was brought to my attention years ago, and I can't remember why, but it was about altar building, and so much of altar building is described in visual terms, and that's true of a lot of magic. We're quite a visual orientated culture, right? Um, and when there was, I think it was because there was a blind woman in one of my classes, and I went, oh, hang on a minute, that actually, like, focusing just on the visual sense is both limiting because we're excluding her and the wisdom that she can bring, the experiences that she can bring. We're like cutting her out of that space. So like she's not being welcomed and we're losing out from not having that. But also for all of us who are able to see, if we focus on just the visual sense, we're still missing out on all those other senses. So since then, I've always tried to include non-visual cues, tactile cues, sound, scent. Like for an air altar, include a wind chime, right, or a feather that you can touch. Those bits and pieces, and it's getting better now, be it that being talked about within the pagan sphere especially, but it's still, if you go back to the old books and you're trying to do it the way that it's outlined, like in the grimoires, you're being a grimoire purist, which some people are. No, so many people can't do that.
I mean, it is quite exclusive. I mean, obviously, the early grimoire stuff was basically people in the church or people with money.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the stuff that moves into, particularly the Bibliothèque Bleue, the French black magic stuff that was being done by sort of your commoners, if you like, that's a lot more simplified, cut back form. And then it sort of changes, but a lot gets lost.
Mm.
And the number of people who are also able to read by then, who are literate, has greatly increased, because until the Renaissance, you've got, after the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, what have you, you've got a very low percentage of the population being literate. And funny, on the senses thing, the new book also has a chapter on engaging with senses, all the senses in conjuration, including their psychic equivalents.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Excellent.
like, for example, not just vision, there's like clairvoyance, and the person who's scrying, even if you don't consider yourself particularly psychic, if you're able to scry into a crystal or a mirror and make that engagement and get a visual image, that's psychic sight. So it's pointing out to people that magical practice tends to sharpen your other senses, the non-physical ones as well, and talking about the physical and non-physical and where they're relevant, point of view of conjuration, like the sense of smell, even taste. I mean, taste might be the least, but
Mm.
it can be a cue. I mean, a particular thing comes to mind, one martial ritual I was involved in, and when the conjuration was being done, got like a metallic tang in my mouth, like a
Yeah.
taste.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, it's a martial spirit that's coming, and there's that. And I talk a bit about that as well, about cues from outside the circle, like the things you can get, like temperature changes up and down, sudden breezes, unexplained noises, the hair on the back of your neck going up, seeing little lights, and all those other things. Again, that I've tried to fill my book with all the stuff that doesn't get talked about but should be, because people take it for granted. If you've got the experience, you often forget other people might not have had those experiences yet. And so I've tried to, that's why these books are full of all these little details and digressions. The new one, the conjuration sequence, I've revised that a bit. I'm also talking about it from the point of view of the spirit, from the astral, and of how they come to the triangle or circle that the crystal is in. Because it's not always a triangle. Triangles are generally there for your infernals. The intelligence is, but if you're calling higher angels or the Olympic spirits, you put it in a circle. They prefer a circle. So you have a second smaller circle with your crystal ball or your mirror in for them. And again, you can say that shape reflects the nature of the spirits more. It's crazy how easy it is to forget the little stuff. Take it for granted, and that's something that's also why I asked the book out like I did with the first Claves to a number of people that I know and said, can you read it and give me feedback? And I've had some really valuable feedback I did last time and I am doing this time from people saying, really like this, but what exactly do you mean here? Okay, well, if you're asking me that, I really need to clarify that, because there are going to be people with less experience or no experience going, I don't get this bit. And I would, the ideal is that there is no bit of the book that people go, I don't understand this. That everything makes sense. That's what what I strive for in the book, is hopefully everything in there makes sense to people.
That's a beautiful thing to strive for. And that's kind of the point of writing. Why are you writing if you don't want it to make sense, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with these books, again, as I say, I've really been pushed by the spirits I work with to sort of get them out there, because it seems to me that a lot of the spirits want more communication with people. It's a two-way thing. It's that I've seen a big change in the last 20 years in the magic in general, where there's a lot bigger move towards people working with spirits, not just in grimoires, but in folk magic and paganism and generally. A lot more people are working with spirits. There's a lot more working, honouring the dead and working with ancestors as well. You go back to the 80s and you didn't really see much of this, for example, or even the 90s, it was starting to creep in. It's only been since the millennia that we're seeing more of this happening. And I think the spirits are responding, or maybe events in our world are impacting on them. Who knows? But definitely, I would say that there was an insistence from them that they want more positive engagement with people.
This is something that I find over my nearly 30 years, so a little bit less, and I've been paying attention to wider trends in a bit of a shorter time than that. But I've noticed that the model of magic that is popular, that is readily available, has shifted very much from a psychological internal model, and that's still present. And it's something that I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So whether you think that people are falling back on that, and that's one of the reasons they don't talk about the spirit's perspective. But we've got that sort of psychological model, which works to a degree. But but now we're having that re-engaging with the spirits as beings, re-engaging with the ancestors, the beloved and mighty dead. And for me, that, when I first started finding my way in, I describe it nowadays as being spirit-led, because I was out there engaging with the spirits of the land and the fair folk. And they were the ones giving me nudges places. And they were the ones going, oh, this book that you've just read with the psychological impetus, well, try it. Oh, look, you're having interesting experiences that can't be explained by all being in your head. Do you think maybe you might want to actually agree that we're real? And I'm like, well, yeah, I can't very well not, can I? So, like what's your thought on that kind of that shift? And
I think it's a very good thing.
mm,
Crowley back in the day with his, you know, stolen Goetia, Ars Goetia, saying that, the Goetic spirits were parts of the psyche, did a huge amount of damage. And
mm,
obviously, he was influenced by Freud at the time. His work was being popularized. Um, and then Crowley bounced back and forwards between that, whether they were or not. But psychology has value. I don't dispute that. But if you're working with external entities, as we are, the psychology part is that it's part. Exactly, it's not a whole. If I can use a model, use the alchemical model of the 12 steps of the alchemical process. You have the 6 white steps and the 6 red steps, and the white steps are the internal purification, and then the 6 red steps are the projection into the world around you. And so the psychological has value for working on yourself, but trying to explain spirits and external things as part of you with a psychological model or apply psychological principles to them, no, forget it.
no.
Um, and I think people realize that the psychological model will only get you so far. And as I say, I do think psychology, psychotherapy, counseling, these things do have value. And, at times in our lives, we go through traumas, we go through difficult times, and you can't just deal with it all yourself, no matter how strong you think you are. You might think you're the best magician in the world. I mean, obviously, you're not. I don't think anybody is. But no matter how strong you are, you need that external help and you need other perspectives. And so that is one example of where it's really valuable to help you rebalance when you've been through difficult situations or emotional troubles, to help you
Mm.
rebalance, because doing magical practice when you're badly knocked off balance can have unfortunate repercussions. So the fact that people are moving more into working with the spirits and recognizing them as distinct and real and away from the psychology, I think is really good. As I say, I think we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and ignore the psychological model, but we should appreciate the psychological model is for dealing with removing blocks in ourselves so our energies flow better and make us better able to be a conduit for our magic and for dealing with other spirits and entities.
Do you think this sort of mirrors our like the cultural thing? Because it's a really short period of time and a limited number of spaces really where we've got this spirits don't exist idea. um and even that, like, occasionally there are concessions to, well, some spirits exist, but like you shouldn't talk to them.
Um, I think we've been this tremendous acceleration, from the point of view, like there's that technological thing of like, so many hundreds of years for technological advance, and it got quicker and quicker, and now it's gone
Mm.
crazy. And I think technology has overtaken individual capacity of people. Um, I read somewhere many years ago that in a single day we see more images than a person living in the Middle Ages saw in their lifetime,
Yeah.
which is the idea of like information overload. Um, and I think more and more people are feeling that the technology that is supposed to serve us is becoming a controlling factor in our lives. And so they're turning away from that. And when you turn away from that, where do you turn?
Mm.
You turn to nature, you turn to spirits. So I think the reason that there's been this rapid shift is because there's this dramatic, rapid evolution of the technology, but running parallel to that and to an extent being pushed by that or as a reaction to that is this increase in appreciation of nature and of working with spirits.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense as a piece of the puzzle, um, of why we're coming back to these spaces and why returning to this understanding of the world as alive and filled with spirits. Um, I really wanted to ask you a question, like just from my own uh, curiosity, because I know that you've looked at this. Um, the fairies in the grimoires. Can you speak a little bit to like because they are there, and I,
No.
I've started to like in the last few years I've been like working with some of the grimoire spirits and looking at some of those the goetic stuff and going, hang on a minute, these feel very similar to the spirits that that introduce themselves to me as fairies, and like there's this overlap, and then I'm like, oh yeah, there's mention of them in the grimoire. So yeah, like can you tell me about fairies in the grimoires, and if someone was curious about that, where would they go and start looking?
Okay, well, the main textbook really that you want is the Book of Oberon. Joseph Peterson, Dan Harms, and I can't remember his first name, something Clark. My apologies to him. Which is, it was an Elizabethan grimoire from around 1580, and there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of fairy stuff, and like you say, it is scattered through various other grimoires from that sort of period on. I mean, particularly, Oberon's popular. You get the Seven Sisters a
Yeah,
lot, uh, and yeah, I think it's a recognition. I don't think the divisions of the spirits were quite as clear cut in those days as we now see them. All the magicians didn't think, oh, I can only work with angels or I can only work with demons. So they would also work with fairies or elementals or, it was just, they're all spiritual creatures. And that's the term I normally use, is spiritual creatures or spiritual beings, rather than putting these divisions on them. Because, at the end of the day, they're put on for convenience. And there can be good ways to put a label, but we always have to remember that a box is a box,
yeah,
and you can't really contain them in a box. So yeah, the Book of Oberon really is a place to start. I actually did an interview a few years ago talking specifically about fairies and grimoires and some of my experiences over the years on the What Magic Is This? They did a 5-episode series on magic with fairies, and I did one of the episodes on that. Which I had a great time doing. I was asked to because they knew that I'm probably one of the few grimoire people who's actually, had quite a lot of experiences with fairies and has worked with them myself. Um, so yeah, I kind of have it in the back of my mind to do a book on that, but I've got a pile of, I've got a list of books I would like to do. It's a case of just they get prioritized according to what inspires me.
mm-hmm.
I kind of got one that was more than half written. I actually probably should return to along with the other two I've got planned. So I've got an old manuscript I want to do, which isn't that big. I just have to translate it. And I want to do volume 3 of the Grimoire Encyclopaedia as well soon. I started on it, but get back to working on that.
You're
Try and
just
get that.
teasing us with all these fantastic manuscripts now. You're going, oh, these things all exist, but you
Um,
can't have them yet.
so I do, I think maybe I would like to do something more on the fairies and grimoires, and also from experience, because like I say, the fairies are a really good example of where we see a sort of grimoire folklore crossover,
Mm-hmm.
in that, in folklore there's contained lots of actual information and the technique and practice of how to engage with fairies. And so I think a book, or maybe somebody will beat me to it now I'm saying this, but a book that takes the stuff from the grimoires and also the stuff from folklore and weaves it together, saying, okay, so this we know this, we know you don't bring elder into your house. We know that they like silver, they don't like iron, and
Mm-hmm.
actually going for music is a good thing. Fairies don't say goodbye when they leave. Never thank a fairy. Um, Always be respectful. Don't eat the food. All this kind of,
Yeah,
or but putting it all together as a practical thing in one place, sort of like
yeah.
like a little manual. I mean, that would only really work, I think, with European.
Well, I tell you what, David, I am actually working on that exact book, and I need a like I wanted to have it more coherently written, because fairies are one of my passions. They have led me all my life. So maybe I can come and pick your brains and about a collaboration in the future.
Well, I certainly think that could be a possibility. Yeah.
You heard it here first, chaps. A possibility, no promises.
But I mean, even worst case scenario, I'd be happy to give you like all the source references and stuff from the grimoire side, and I do have quite an extensive, collection of stuff on, fairy folklore and things, because, like I say, I have had some very interesting and profound experiences with fairies ever since. I've told the story you might have heard about me doing the pentagram ritual.
Well, share it anyway for our.
Okay. So when I was like a young 20 or so, very full of myself, and as you are at that age. I've been doing magic for sort of 6 years, and thought I was the bee's knees. And I went out to these woods, and I said, okay, I'll do the pentagram ritual first to clear the space. I did the pentagram ritual, and then this figure just sort of floated towards me, this sort of beautiful, ethereal woman in like sort of white, in the sort of shimmering white. Well, that's a fairy queen. And I was paralyzed, literally from the neck down. I just couldn't move. I was frozen. And well, she looks really pissed. And she sort of like stared at me, and I thought, okay, fairies, what can I do here? Think, David, think. So then for the next half hour, I recited poems to her, and I sang to her to try and placate her and apologize for having been so rude as to go into her space and do the less banishing, which never do the banishing ritual of the pentagram outdoors, folks. It's an indoor ritual, because you're basically saying F off to everything in space, and it's blasting it all out. So you're going into somebody's house, the wood, and telling them to F off from their own space. And guess what? Fairies are really powerful beings. That stuff don't work on them. It had no impact, no effect whatsoever. And at the end of the half hour, she just gave me the slightest little nod and drifted off, and then my body could move again. And that was a fabulous lesson as a young, arrogant magician, that one, respect your environment, two, don't do the pentagram ritual outside, and three, there's always things out there that are a lot bigger and more powerful than you. And I consider myself very lucky that I got away with just spending half an hour racking my brain for every poem I could think of and reciting songs I knew the lyrics of, which included things like Black Sabbath, but I was just singing whatever song I could think of, that I knew the whole lyric for, so that I could. And so after that, I had it, had other, both by myself and in groups, quite serious and major experiences with encountering fairies that made me appreciate how powerful they are, not to be trifled with. But that at the same time, if approached correctly, it can be incredibly rewarding to work with.
Yeah. Well, they're some of our nearest neighbors, and they are so grounded, I suppose you'd say, in this world as much as we are. Yeah.
That is it. I mean, I think that's why they're there a bit in the grimoires, because they are easier to encounter. Like you say, they are our nearest neighbors. They can impact the physical world far more easily than other spirits, because they're already so close to it and can step into it whenever they want. And so that's why you have all your stories about, the brownies doing the housework and the knockers in the mine and all the things like this. You know all this, but I'm just saying it for the benefit of anyone listening.
Oh yeah. I'm agreeing. I'm like, yes, I love this. Yes.
So yeah, they are very close and very powerful and very effective. So that's a route that people can go down, but it's good to be pre-prepared. So I think the idea we've just talked about for a book that gives people the etiquette and stuff, particularly, and things to avoid, it's another one of those essentials that needs to be out there.
Yeah, and it's that It's like the Seven Sisters ritual, the versions that I've come across. There's none of this, you shall do this. There is a laying out of a feast and going, come neighbors, and like, in the name of all that is holy, like, let's make this space nice and be here in peace together. But here is a feast I've put on for you.
Funny enough, there's a chapter on working with genius loci for outdoor rituals in the new book as well. And I talk
Yes.
about spirit feasts. I
Yes.
talk the whole thing of getting to know the spirits of the place, well before you're planning on working there, finding out what they're like, making offerings of local produce as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, especially like if you're in an area and they say we like this and this, you don't buy apples from another country. You get them from a local orchard. You go to a local farmers market. If there isn't one, worst case scenario, go to the local health food shop. Get produce that comes locally, that is native to their environment. That after the offering has been accepted, that other animals and things in nature will be able to do. So, if you do a feast and if you offer meat, because the traditional roast lamb in the fairy feast, make sure you've taken the bones out
Mm.
of any meat or fish that you might make as offerings, so that the animals wouldn't be harmed that will consume the physical essence of the food afterwards. So there's a whole chapter about working with the
Yeah.
genius loci and food offerings, spirit feasts, etc. in the book, because I much prefer to do conjuration outdoors if I can. I know it's not always practical, but traditionally, you look at the early grimoire stuff, it's an outdoor tradition. It was an outdoor tradition. It's not always practical, and it's far easier to do it indoors if you have the space. But there's something quite special about doing conjurations outdoors.
Yeah, there's a shift in the energy. You're then working with the spirits that are in that space. And I think it goes back to that thing about technology that you were talking about earlier. We're then, especially nowadays, we're away from not only our everyday space that we control and that we have said this is our home and we are going to, like, there's kind of a certain amount of inbuilt protection in our homes, right? That make it harder for things to come in, or it should. But it also gets us away from the technological hum of the lights and all of that. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Uh, yeah, that was one of my favourite chapters to actually write, because talking about just the things to think about with that, like what type of spirit you're calling, and then considering what sort of landscape. If you're going for a lunar spirit, you want to do it by water, by a lake or a river, preferably, or
Yeah.
possibly by the sea, and taking into account again, like say, the environment. It's back to spirit ecology. It's a really important factor, and bringing in, like say, the stuff that fits in with the ethos of the tradition, even if it wasn't written there. So, in the first Claves, I gave the consecrations for the items. I've added a few extra ones in the appendix in the new one, because there were ones that weren't used in those conjurations, but that you might want to use, like a wand, for example.
Mm.
So I talk about the whole process of cutting a wand and how to approach the tree, and not just go and chop it off and walk off, but how to actually then do, like, to heal the tree or the wound you've caused, the offerings that you make to the tree in return for the wand, and having that engagement. It's not just about going and chopping a piece off a tree, or it shouldn't be. Maybe it was to then, but we have changed. We're in a different space and we respect our environment. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole thing in the wand consecration, all talking about wand gathering and how to do it in a way that's respectful.
And
Because
I like that you say about the wound healing, because it's that, like, so a lot of the examples of like cutting a wand that I've seen have been like during a waxing moon, and at this, and it's like, well, if you do that in a waxing moon at the spring, then that's when the sap is rising. And if you then go and cut a whole bunch of wands off one tree, you're like when the sap is flowing, you're more likely to injure it. It's then more vulnerable to disease. So it's sort of being aware of the actual physicality of the beings that you're interacting with. And thank you to Ben Allen, my druid friend, who works in woods and trees, and pointed this out to me. And we don't talk about that within pagan and magical spaces because we're so focused on the energy and the spirits. And so I love that you're bringing in those pieces and actually having that
And asking
conversation.
the permission of the tree as well before you chop it.
Yeah, yeah.
As the same with like the space, like if you go and you engage with those spirits and say, and then after you've shown, you've made offerings, you've got to know them over a period of time, and you can learn as much from native spirits as you do from conjured spirits as well. So let's not forget that important aspect of going and getting approved, then asking for their approval to do the conjuration. And my thing then is that when you've got their approval, when you actually go to do the conjuration, you offer the feast as a thank you. So it's a full-blown feast as a thank you for them letting you use their space. I've also actually created a new thing, which is in the new book, which again, not in the grimoires, but there was a piece in Summa Sacra Magicae which gave me this idea. It's part of the text that hasn't been translated, hasn't been published yet. And where it talks about writing on the stone there. So I came up with a technique for taking some stones from the site and painting names on them, doing stuff, but actually making them part of your circle as well, so that when you put your magic circle in that space, you embed it temporarily as part of the landscape rather than impose it onto the landscape.
Yes.
Because again, for me, important distinction. The age of like imposing on should have gone, and for a lot of us, it has gone. So, we need to think of the things like we were saying earlier. Not just okay, it says this, so I do this, but what's the impact of this? Is there a way I can do it better? So, if I can actually use something that's from that site to help anchor the magic circle there in the physicality of it, so it's more in tune with the space, rather than just bang, here's this thing with these various magic names, maybe in Hebrew and other languages, but okay, here's this magic circle which also has this stone from this very place. It's any tradition has to evolve, and so with my work, I'm trying to help the tradition evolve. And if other people pick up on the things I'm doing and do them as well, then hopefully it will.
I think
Or
it's
hopefully those things will make it part of the evolution. I mean, it undoubtedly will, because I get conversations with other people who've been practicing short and long times, and I get some great feedback and ideas from them. Somebody said, "Oh, I went through, and I think in your footnotes you thank people something like 25 times for ideas or things that they gave you." It's like, yeah, because we learn from each other. And I love to give people credit for where they've inspired me or told me something that has helped me develop my practice and what I'm doing. I think it's really important that we emphasize the positive side of the positive community in magic, where we grow and learn off each other.
yeah. It's that human spirit communication, learning from the spirits, learning from human communication, human other than human, learning from the trees, from the animals, from the landscape. Like we're all in that community is all part of the magical, like we're all in magical community, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love it. I have so enjoyed this conversation, and I'm loving hearing about that, because like my journey has been sort of through various points of traditions over the years. Your journey's been through various points of traditions, and I'm hearing this, where these places that people think of them as so different, as so separate, they're like highfalutin grimoire stuff is like the impression a lot of people have, and they're like low folk magic. And you're talking about this thing that I've seen and that I'm seeing is happening, and it sounds like you're seeing is happening, is actually like they come out of the same root and they're coming back together, and we're consciously bringing them back together as we come into community.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, we say it's this tradition or that tradition, but no tradition grows in isolation. They always cross-fertilize with other traditions. We've seen it from the ancient world onwards, and as you say, I personally think there was probably a bit more cross-fertilization from between grimoire stuff and witchcraft in the Middle Ages and through than is given credit, and
Oh,
definitely with folk magic. I mean, there's loads of stuff in folk magic that obviously comes from the grimoires. So
yeah.
wouldn't it make sense for it to go the other way as well? The folk
Oh,
stuff back to the grimoires.
absolutely. I mean, it has to. It has to, because it's the spirits that and us. And yeah, yeah. Oh, love it, love it, love it. There was one other thing that I wanted to ask you, and we're getting to the end of time. And that's it's also another cheeky question, because I'm coming to your grimoire retreat this weekend, and I'm really, really excited about it, because you're going to be sharing with us stuff from your second Clavis book, the Clavis Spiritum. And there was one of the pieces on the schedule that's just been sent out today, which said about the conjuration through the four winds, and that this is a new piece. Can you tease us a little bit, tell us a little bit about
Okay, it's
that?
not four wins; it's a lot more than four.
More than four winds. Okay.
So last year, I kind of got prompted by my spirits to think about the winds, and I looked in Swan Book of Norris, and there's some material there. I contacted Stephen Skinner and said, this before he'd published book one of Summa Sacra Magicae, can you send me the stuff on the winds, please? Because I knew he was going to be publishing it, and he did. And there's like a conjuration of the winds in there. There's actually 40.
40. Oh, not
Right.
four, 40.
There's seven main ones and then a load under them. And because the intuition I'd had and that I was told by the spirits was that the winds are used to bring the spirits to you. So they come a lot faster. They're like transport, as it were. It's the difference between you calling the spirit and it walks to you, or you're calling the spirit and it gets an Uber. Um, so I did this conjuration as part of a conjuration of Jophiel, planetary intelligence, Jupiter. And I asked him about it, and I asked him loads of other questions about other revisions I was making, and he sort of said, "Yeah, this is great. Do it. We like this." And add a couple of lines here just to make it even sort of tighter, which I did. Okay, that worked amazingly. I did it. He was there by the end of the first conjuration. So I then contacted a load of other magicians saying, are you doing any conjuration in the coming months? And usually the answer was, yeah, because I knew who I was talking, picking. And said, would you like to join me in an experiment and do this wind conjuration before you do the main conjuration? And yeah, everyone was up for it. And so far, we had over a dozen magicians or pairs or groups of three doing stuff, people working with others as well. With planetary intelligences, limbic spirits, different types of demons, angels, and every single time the spirit has appeared by the end of the first conjuration at the latest. Sometimes by the end of the wind conjuration, because you name the spirit to be called in there. And the reason there's 40 is because they're for the different directions, and wherever in the world, correspondingly on the astral, the spirit is, the wind that's closest to it is the one that brings it. So you've got all the different directions. So that one then brings the spirit to you. So far it's been 100% success, which is quite astonishing, because if that continues and other people get the same results as everyone has so far, then we could be looking at bye hours and hours of doing repeated conjurations, because spirit was having to make its own way rather than getting the transport that it used to get centuries ago. So it could have a huge impact. I'm really excited about it. I'm delighted at the results that everyone has been getting. They've done it. They've incorporated it with other grimoires, their own stuff. It's not using my template. None of these people have been using my template, by the way. Like people have done classic Ars Goetia, and they've done drawing spirits into crystals. They've done the Arbitel, and all different grimoires where they've just at the point before you conjure the spirit, they conjure the wind first. Everyone's and some amazing after effects as well. So I'm super excited to. This is in the book. I will be talking about it at the workshop next weekend, and my next run of the conjuration online course, which starts at the end of April. I'm going to be including it in there. A lot of the material from Clavis Spirit will go into the second run of that. So, and it makes sense, the winds are such a strong force. And if I was talking with Jason Miller the other day, and he was saying, "Oh, I use like the winds and the rivers to speed up spells and spirits in my Hecatean system."
Yeah,
So it's something that was there, and you see it in some of the ATRs as well,
yeah.
which I mentioned about the winds being used to bring the spirits. So it's not something I've introduced; it's something I'm restoring. And
Mm.
again, hopefully that will make it easier for people coming to conjuration. That if they do the wind and conjuration and the spirit, and it turns up, yippee,
Oh,
quid
that's
in,
really
as we
awesome.
say.
Quits in indeed. Oh no, I love it. And it reminds me there's so within my tradition, the Anderson Fairy tradition, we have the seven guardians, so the four cardinal directions above, below, center. And there's a an invocation that Teethorn Coyle wrote. And so for the Eastern Guardian, Starfinder, daddy, 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 all the qualities, and then ride the winds and join our right. And it's, yeah, of course, the spirits are going to come quicker if they've got someone, like if they've got support traveling. Of course they are. How beautiful.
And most spirits are described as being made of rarefied air. So literally, the wind just carries the air in it, and boom, gets it through really fast.
Oh, how beautiful. Oh, I love it. I'm so excited. Sorry.
And I've chatted to people like Stephen Skinner and Mihai Bhattacharya, various friends, and everyone's thinking the same as me. It's like we are restoring a missing piece from conjuration. It was there. You see it in Summa Sacra Magica, Swan Book of Honorius, in those early grimoires, like 14th century. Then it kind of fades out. Although there's references that imply it, but it then doesn't have the wholeness of it anymore, how to do it. Then by the time you get to all the later stuff with all the demonic stuff, not there at all. And that's where you find the references where they're saying, you're going to do this conjuration 9 times, it's going to take you hours. Yeah, because you've got no winds.
Yeah.
But you bring the winds in and say, I hope that works as well for everyone else as it has for myself and all the people who have tried it. Uh, I guess the acid test will be when people who've never done conjuration or don't have much experience do it, if they get results as good, which is also why I'm now starting to put it out in the stuff I teach, because I'm really hoping that other people will get that same beneficial result that myself and all the others I've asked have done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to our listeners, when that book comes out, make sure you pick up a copy and give it a go, and then email David and tell him, yes, that worked. The winds are amazing. Um, and it's that, isn't it that piece you were talking about earlier? The grimoires, the magic books that we've got, they were people's notebooks. So it makes sense that there are gaps, and that there are gaps now that because we're not passing it person to person anymore, we're not getting those gaps filled in by our teachers in the same way. So for you to find this piece and go, oh, here we go, let's rebuild it, is just such a gift for us.
Well, it's like prompted by the spirits. At the end of the day, who taught the people doing the grimoires? The
Yeah.
spirits did. This is how you do it. This is how you engage with us. And and that works for other things. That works with fairy or nature spirits. It's like you make the effort to communicate with them and find out the dynamic that works for them and for you. And yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. And what would be fascinating would be if other people incorporate that sort of thing where compatible with stuff like the fairy things. I mean, the way the conjuration is written, where you name all the winds, then you've got this whole string of divine names at the end, like seeing something like the Sword of Moses. And there's so much magical power in that string. People have been commenting like crazy. It's like it just really builds up. There's this 95 names, and it sounds like a lot, but you go through it, and by the time you're like, it's like boom. It's incredible how much magical momentum and power there is in that string of names, which I think really adds to the getting the spirit there. And so it'd be interesting to see and people have been incorporating it into stuff that's more PGM based as well, and having success with it. So
the Greek magical papyri for those listening.
Yeah. So yeah, for me that is one of the most exciting things of recent times in my own practice, to have had that insight given to me and to be like pushing it out there and promoting it for people to do.
Do you know what I'm curious about, because you said, oh, using it in relation to fairy spirits, and quite often the fey spirits or the land spirits that, like, they're not exactly the same, but relation that I'm interacting with, they're here in this land. And so when I go elsewhere, I'll work with a slightly different set. But now I'm wondering, if you use the wind conjuration, would those that live in your home that you share your landscape with, if you're elsewhere, could you call them to come and visit you somewhere? Could you call ones that you grew up with to come and visit you, just to visit? Like, what would happen if that? I think I'm going to have to go and talk to my queen.
Yeah, ask permission of the ones in the area. And can these distant cousins of yours come and visit? Is that okay?
Can they come and visit? Do they want to come and visit?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's back to that thing of like your relationship with the space you're working and getting the okay from the spirits there. It would be the same thing. It's like, oh, I want to call these other ones here. Is there going to be any clash if I do?
Yeah. Oh, how fascinating. Oh, there are so many possibilities. Um, Thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and for also for the fact that you're sharing it, and that you're sharing it in your books in ways that you're like people to understand and support them, and in your courses. And I'm hoping that people will hear this and feel inspired to come along. So as we've mentioned, this coming weekend, which I'm trying to think what the dates are, it's the 12th and 13th of April. You're going to be doing a course in Bristol, not in Bristol, sorry, near Bristol, in, is it Yate? In southwest England, not the Bristol in America. So where can people find that if they have now, they're hearing the spirits call and they want to come and learn how to do conjuration?
So the Visible College, if you find the Visible College website, I think there's still a couple of places left. It's going to be a very intense weekend, going through the whole conjuration process and all the preparation and everything. Yeah, the winds and lots of other stuff there. I've got a lot of material to cover in 2 days, so I expect a lot of people to be leaving at the end like
notebooks full of words written in ink and
piles of handouts. I'm going to be, things like like the wind conjuration, for example. I'll give people a printout of that. So
you're not going to ask us to take dictation of 40 wind names and 95 names.
Yeah, having to spell every name of each wind and stuff. But the wind stuff's fascinating. I like the research I've been doing on that, because I was looking back to earlier sources, and there's a whole load of stuff in Arabic magic with the winds. They even mentioned in the Quran. There's a reference of the winds carrying spirits in the Greek magical papyri. So I was like looking back at earlier things that feed into the tradition.
Yeah.
See where they came from. And it does seem to be the Arabic seems to be the place where there's a lot of wind stuff. So that, I think, is the most likely where it went into the grimoire tradition from. But if you think about the deserts and that part of the world and how big an impact the wind has, you can see why they would have had that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that piece about the jinn being sort of air and fire, and those spirits of that heat, that hot air, and which of course is both moving, right? Mm. I was thinking about the story of there's a story of Solomon flying on the magic carpet.
Yeah.
Whole Arabian thing. Yeah.
The winds chapter in the book, there's a lot more material than went into my blog. That's sort of like a fraction. And plus, after I wrote the blog, I found loads more material, as you do when you keep going down rabbit holes, don't you? It's like, oh, there's a side channel here. I've got to go and check that out. Oh, and here's another one.
That's very cool. Ah, okay. So I like to end these with inviting our speaker guest, inviting my guest, there you go, to share something practical that people can go away and do. So do you have something practical that our listeners can do after they've like hit like and subscribe and share and all the buttons and like finish this, all of that jazz?
Yeah, I mean, one of the apart from grimoire, running sort of parallel to my grimoire passion over the decades, it's been my Kabbalah passion, and I've written quite a lot about the Shekinah, about the divine feminine in Kabbalah, and there's a simple meditation with a candle or oil lamp for the Shekinah that I wanted to put in. I mean, ideally, an oil lamp with olive oil and a cotton wick to burn to a really clean flame, or a beeswax candle. And you place your candle or lamp at least 3 foot from the wall in the room. Obviously, curtains up, closed, no light up. That's the only light source in the dark room. And you sit and gaze at it, and you gaze at the flame, and you see the white and the red and the yellow in the flame. And then as you look at it, you sort of become more aware of the blackness around the flame. And after a while, between the white and red and yellow of that dancing flame and the blackness, there's a faint blueness at that sort of where the light and the darkness meet. And that blueness represents the Shekinah. It's like the point, that liminal point between the light and the dark. So it's like when you see that blueness, to just let your mind open, because by then you should be silent from the concentrating on the flame, and just let that blueness transport your mind into the Shekinah, into the divine feminine.
Mm. Oh, that's so beautiful. That piece, that where the light and the dark meet. There she is.
And that's actually, I took that idea from the Zohar because it describes the 5 colours of the candle flame being white, red, yellow, sky blue, and the black around the outside. So, yeah, that was just inspired from an old Kabbalistic, one of the big Kabbalistic texts.
I love that.
For example, taking inspiration from old sources and making them into something simple and fresh for now.
So I'm going to really put you on the spot now because of the conversation that we had, the part of the conversation we had earlier about using different senses. So what could be an equivalent for someone who can't look at a candle flame? And I know that's really putting you on the spot.
I would say, you know what I would do? Get a little bit of rose water and put a little bit of almond essence in it. You'd have to check on levels for this, so to make sure it's not going to cause any problems. And for a person to sit and place that on their tongue, and for the flavours of the rose and the almond, which are both particularly associated with the Shekinah, maybe as they put it on, say, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys, and put that on their tongue and just feel those tastes. And because you'd get the rose and you'd get the almond and you get the merging of them, and to just experience the way those tastes swirl. And then in that swirling of the purity and beauty of the rose and the wisdom of the almond, again, you're going to find the Shekinah, who's symbolized by those things.
Thank you. And in that, just that little description, there were so many threads of magic in there. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that people will just reflect back on what David said and on that description of that experience, and just really listen to that and see what rises in for you. Because yeah, there's some magic in there for you. Thank you so much, David. This has been an utter delight.
It has been. Thank you, Halo.
I would love to continue talking to you for another hour, 2 hours, long into the night, but I will let you get home to your family, and I look forward to seeing you at the workshop next weekend and getting my paws on your new book and exploring conjuration. I will put links for where people can find things, the retreat, where can people find you, and I'll put links in the comments.
Yeah, I mean, my blog is on davidrankine.com. Nice original name there.
Yep.
And obviously, Hadean tend to publish my books, so the most recent works are there.
And they are well worth getting hold of. If you want to explore David's work on the Kabbalah and on the where's my copy of it? It's the Sefer Yetzirah magic book. It's a little black and yellow book, and it's pocket sized, but there's a depth of things in there that's got a bit more about the Shekinah in it as well. And obviously Claves Intelligentarium. I'm sure I'm missing syllables in there because I haven't got it written in front of me. But yeah, check out all of David's books and the course coming up. We've got the workshop at the weekend and the course at the end of April. Where will you be teaching that through?
That's the online one through Hadean. Hasn't been advertised. I'm not sure if it's completely full. But even if it is full, the next run will be at the end of October. So if people want to do it, it's an online 6 weeks, 6 consecutive Sundays. It sort of runs on a Sunday evening for 2 hours on 6 consecutive sessions. If people are interested, there's an advert for the first run, so you can see the kind of things. Although I've added more material now. You just contact Hadean and say you'd like to be put on the waiting list for it, if anybody wants to do that.
I know the first round sold out so quickly, and as you're saying, the next round it may well already be full. So if you're interested and you can't make it this weekend, then get yourself on that waiting list, because yeah, those spots will go.
And that was great. I had so much fun doing that. And the questions that people asked, again, there's bits of material that are in the Clavis Spiritum because of questions people asked me. I think something I hadn't considered, and it can be really simple. It's an obvious example. Somebody mentioned about they were talking about the sword, and I was talking about the consecration. And I said, and of course, anytime you do a conjuration, particularly if you go outdoors, but anytime, you should clean it afterwards. and this is the best way to, cleaning, how to clean swords and blades. But people don't say, "Oh, clean it," but it's just taken for granted. If you don't clean it, it's going to go rusty over time. You don't want a rusty sword or knife. So I wouldn't have, if somebody hadn't asked me something when I was talking about consecration of the sword, I wouldn't have thought, "Oh yeah, that goes." So again, it's that thing of like the interaction between people produces so much fruit, and so I was thankful for it. I learned a lot from the students on the course I was teaching because they pushed me to think of things or to give the best answer I could, or say, "I'm going to go and check something out, and I'll get back to you next week, and maybe I can add something on top of that." Because none of us know everything. You even
Except
if
you.
you're even if you're an expert, there's still always more to learn.
Yeah.
And one thing I have noticed over the years with practitioners who've been doing it for decades and decades, they say that as you get older, you get more rigid. But in my experience, magical practitioners actually become more fluid over time because they become more aware of how things can change and the importance of being receptive to change and not set in this is how it always has to be. They become more like willows than oaks.
Well, I really hope that is true, and that I become more flexible over time, because I've never been able to touch my toes, and that'd be quite nice. Yeah. So you've brought up something, and I always ask this question, and I haven't squeezed it in earlier because we were having such an interesting thing. So I'm going to ask it to you to close up, and that is about magical community. So what advice would you give to anyone about how we can best grow, support, or be in magical community and learn from each other?
I'm a great believer in in-person contact where possible. So going along to conferences, moots, things like that. I think even book launches, a good way to meet people, find like-minded spirits. Um, Obviously, online you can meet a lot of people, but there is a lot of bullshit and there are predatory people as well. So you have to look at the groups and assess what the crazy factor is, what the troll factor is. Is it a group where women get shouted down? Is it a group where you see like anti-trans bullshit? Whatever, any of these red flags, just leave the group. There are good groups discussing stuff, but you have to have a bit of discernment before you engage too much online, I think, because people will try and suck you in, particularly if they think that you're fairly fresh to things. I mean, I tend to say, if people ask me for advice, I will recommend groups, but at the same time, I think that is a good way to do it. It's personal recommendation. If there's people who meet who you like, who you respect, say, where would you say is a good place? And they might say this group or that group. It depends on the interest. I'm in some groups on Facebook that are very good. Some are very closed or secret because they're specialists. But there are others. I think the occult magic and sorcery one, I mean, is pretty good. It's got about 20k people on it.
It's huge.
Yeah, the moderators do a good job with that. There was a little crazy phase, but it got well handled, and interestingly, some of the post levels dropped off. But what happened was people went back to actually asking questions about interesting things rather than going on about crazy stuff. At the end of the day, with online groups, they have to have a degree of moderation if you don't want like trolls and crazies to take them over. It's just a fact of social media.
Yeah.
And also, if you do come across material you like, if you read stuff, you read books, it can be worth reaching out to the author. I mean, for myself, I will generally try and respond same day or next day if I get somebody contacts me and asks me a question about something. I don't like to leave people hanging, and I feel if someone's taken the time, to ask me a question and I can be of any help to that person, then I'm happy to respond. So there's a lot of good authors out there who, if you write to them, they might not get back to you the same day, but they will get back to you. And there's also people doing great courses. You look at people like Jason Miller, Jack Grail, for example. There's lots of others I'm not naming, but those are the first two.
Me.
They're doing courses on a bigger scale than me. Mine are.
Yeah, they're definitely on a big scale.
So yeah, there is a lot of good stuff out there, but it's just, take your time. Don't rush into it when it comes to community.
Yeah. And I love that you use that word discernment.
Yeah. Well, discernment is like the first virtue that we strive to cultivate. Not always easy, but it is essential.
It is, and an ongoing process. So thank you for that. So it's if you can in person, and if you can't, just be slow when you're moving into online spaces. And if you see red flags, feel free to jump straight out again. Yeah, I think that's really solid advice there. So thank you, David. Any last thing you want to share with our listeners?
I think I'm done for now. It's getting late.
Yeah, grand. Get home to your little one. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. Maybe I can get you back again in the future and we can talk about the Shekinah and the Kabbalah and the other side of your passions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be delighted to.
Thank you. To all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Tea with Halo and David Rankine. If you've enjoyed, then comment, let us know which bit was your favorite, what you're feeling inspired by, and how your encounter with the Shekinah, with the divine feminine through the candle flame or the rose and the almond essence goes. Share with us below. We want to hear about that experience. Feel free to drop David an email as he's invited if you've got any questions or something you want to go, yes, this really worked well for me. And you can also email me as well if you like. I'm much slower at getting back to people, but I'm here to help. If you think there's someone who would enjoy this, then do please share it with them. And if you hated every second of it, then why are you still here? Please go and do something that you enjoy with your life. If you are still here, you are very welcome to come and join me in the Enchanted Academy. So you can find the links to that below. That's my online community where we have weekly circles engaging in different types of magic. And there's lots of lovely people in there. You can come and ask questions and join in. And do come and find David's courses and books. Highly, highly recommended. Absolute delight to read for someone coming from a very different background like myself, and really helpful to people who are already immersed in the grimoire and Kabbalistic traditions, as we've heard. Until next time, may your path be enchanted. May your grimoires be open books to your hearts, and may the spirits, both embodied and non-embodied, be your allies and friends and co-workers on this path of magic and re-enchanting the world. Thank you.